First, in all conventional and nuclear military scenarios, the Russians are indeed the ones who will win. Russia is not only wiping out the Ukrainian military, but also the Ukrainian society. Russian forces are advancing quickly in Donbass, and airstrikes that destroyed Ukraine's energy infrastructure over the past weekend show they are ready to push Ukraine into a dark winter. Moreover, Russia launched a medium-range hypersonic missile strike on the city of Dnipro with a non-nuclear warhead early on November 21. This implies that the Ukraine conflict can only have one outcome. Kyiv must surrender and accept negotiations. Second, Russia is unlikely to occupy all of Ukraine. Russia may want the Ukrainian military to collapse, but wholly occupying the country is not something the Kremlin desires. The cost of annexing Crimea in early 2014 was huge for Russia's financial balance. The economic base on the peninsula, including tourism and private enterprises, collapsed due to the war, and Russia had to dip into its National Reserve Fund to pay for the annexation. The second phase of the Ukraine invasion in 2022 halved the National Wealth Fund, with a reduction of $79 billion, although high energy prices compensated Russia. The Kremlin simply cannot destroy most of Ukraine in war and then rebuild it, as it would cause their financial system to collapse. Third, peace talks will only succeed if Russia's objectives are almost entirely met, including Ukraine remaining neutral, limiting its military capabilities, accepting the loss of 4 regions, and not joining NATO but possibly joining the EU. Since Russia is dominating the battlefield, a peace agreement must be made on the Kremlin's terms. If this is not accepted, the Kremlin may push Kyiv into an unconditional surrender, leading to an outcome that could have even more disastrous effects on the West, potentially triggering World War III. Fourth, a reliable force is needed to establish and monitor the ceasefire line. The stability of a ceasefire and establishing a buffer zone between Ukraine and Russia are crucial. Both the current Russian government and the incoming Trump administration have serious concerns about the UN. Only the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, a global peace and human rights organization, can effectively establish and control a buffer zone and ceasefire. Neither party can directly control the organization, including the US, NATO, or Russia. The OSCE would be responsible for reporting to the Security Council, where all major nuclear powers will monitor the ceasefire and the creation of the buffer zone. This will be the best opportunity to set up objective monitoring of the ceasefire line. Fifth, due to the lack of mutual trust, the parties must commit to de-escalation actions in advance. The Russia-Ukraine war has sowed division within Europe and between Russia and the US. Western war propaganda claims Russia attacked Ukraine without cause, fostering hostility and anti-Russian sentiment. Meanwhile, the Kremlin's propaganda is that the West is surrounding Russia by allowing Ukraine to join NATO, justifying their attack on Ukraine. The growing involvement of NATO in Ukraine has been a major driving force for escalation. Before the Russia-Ukraine war, most observers believed that no NATO member state would directly participate in the conflict with Russia. However, everything changed in Ukraine, with former NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg even defiantly declaring that Ukraine will join NATO. The question is not whether but when. The new Secretary General, Mark Rutte, continues to argue in this direction. Ukraine's attacks on Russia's early warning radar systems in Krasnodar Krai and Orenburg this year were highly provocative acts of escalation. These radars played no role in the conflict in Ukraine. Still, Kyiv attacked nuclear forces and command and control systems, which the Russian nuclear doctrine has listed as one of the conditions for using atomic weapons. Fortunately, the Kremlin did not react. The war in Ukraine should have ended by the spring of 2022. At that time, the Kremlin had achieved most of its objectives in the special military operation. Peace talks were held in Istanbul, Turkey, in March–April 2022, and they were believed to have reached a ceasefire agreement before the US and UK were allegedly involved and blocked the peace process. By the summer of 2024, Ukraine and the West also signaled their readiness for a peaceful solution, and the Kremlin cautiously welcomed it. However, shortly after, in August 2024, Kiev attacked the Kursk region in Russia. Moreover, the Minsk I and II agreements signed in September 2014 and February 2015 to end the conflict in Ukraine were essentially used by NATO to buy time and arm Ukraine against Russia. For these reasons, trust between the parties must be rebuilt. Before a peace agreement, de-escalation actions should include Russia limiting its military presence in the areas it has relinquished and relocating its attack systems far enough from the border. The EU and the US must also immediately stop all weapons supplies and be ready to lift the economic sanctions against Russia. Peace in Ukraine will not be easy, but now more than ever, the world needs to end the war, and this is also the top priority of the upcoming administration of Donald Trump. The failure of the Biden administration, or, more accurately, of the elite class aligned with the NWO. Their significant domestic and international actions judge the success or failure of U.S. presidents. This is the historical standard by which historians assess them and shape their legacy. Some U.S. presidents are remembered in history, such as General Washington, who became the first president of the young United States and presided over the drafting of the U.S. Constitution. President Lincoln saved the country from disintegration during the Civil War and prevented foreign powers, especially the British Empire, from intervening to save the South. President Lyndon Johnson is remembered as the worst president for plunging the U.S. deep into the Vietnam War. President Richard Nixon had many successes in foreign policy, but the Watergate scandal led to his downfall. With only more than 40 days left, the American people are approaching the end of the Biden administration. According to any historical measure of U.S. history and any objective standard used to assess his predecessors, the Biden administration is considered a catastrophic failure for the American people. In the coming years, the failure of the Biden administration will likely be explained by multiple factors. Many historians may argue that his dementia has hindered his ability to lead the country effectively, or others may assert that his presidency was essentially a third term for Barack Hussein Obama, with Biden being controlled by Obama's former advisors, who were predominantly from his administration. It is still too early to fully assess the impact of the Biden administration on the U.S., but we can summarize a few key points. Domestically, the Biden administration has destroyed the economy, inflation has returned aggressively, and the U.S. border has been intentionally opened. This has led to an unprecedented wave of illegal immigration, estimated at up to 15 million people. Another domestic failure is the increasing national debt, which impacts all Americans and national security. Similarly, energy security has been threatened, with the Biden administration recklessly depleting the national oil reserves and undermining U.S. energy independence due to its support for green energy. These domestic disasters suggest that the U.S. has been intentionally targeted for gradual destruction to pave the way for a new world order based on the elite's control principles under the NWO rather than the principles of liberalism and freedom. In foreign policy, the Biden administration is remembered for the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan and its negligence in allowing Beijing to act freely across the Indo-Pacific. The Biden administration will be held accountable for the Ukraine conflict, as it failed to prevent Russia's invasion of Ukraine, or more accurately, it successfully provoked Russia into attacking Ukraine. By continuing to maintain and escalate the war instead of pressuring both sides to end the conflict, the Biden administration has contributed to the ongoing crisis. The Middle East has shifted from stability to war, with Israel being attacked by Hamas on October 7, 2023, and Israel's retaliatory strikes dragging many into the cycle of violence. In the Indo-Pacific, Beijing has treated Biden officials condescendingly, partly because they know that the Biden administration has compromised with China, enriching the Biden family through millions of dollars. For example, the strategic Bagram airfield in Afghanistan would not have fallen into Chinese hands, and China's influence on the Taliban administration would have been avoided. The Ukraine war might have been stopped, and billions of U.S. taxpayer dollars would not have been wasted on feeding the military-industrial complex and the corrupt Kyiv government. Furthermore, the U.S.'s weapons stockpiles would not have been depleted. The Joe Biden administration leaves a dangerous world and a fragile economy for its successor, Donald Trump. Fortunately, Trump and his administration will be ready for the monumental task of ending the war in Ukraine and focusing on containing China,